Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the SERMAPod. This is the podcast for the Sports and Entertainment Risk Management Alliance. I am the founder and CEO of SERMA, Rich Lenkov. I'm also your host, and we're very privileged today to have an amazing guest discussing a very relevant topic that is ongoing at the moment. We've got Dr. Susan Lipkins joining us. Dr. Lipkins is a psychologist for over 30 years. She is frequently in the media discussing hazing and conflict and violence in the school setting. She is also a frequently retained expert in cases involving this issue. She is the author of Preventing Hazing, How Parents, Teachers, and Coaches Can Stop the Violence, Harassment, and Humiliation. And she is also featured in a short film called Betrayal. The website is InsideHazing.com. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the Northwestern situation, which is dominating the news, we want to talk a little bit and get your insight on why hazing is so prevalent in college athletics. What's the history there? What's the psychology, of course, behind this ritual in the space of college athletics?
Well, hazing is a process based on a tradition used by groups to discipline and to maintain the hierarchy. And so the process is to let the new people know, the freshmen know, that they have no power whatsoever, that they're at the bottom of the heap, so to speak. From my point of view, we probably have had hazing as part of human nature, part of proving that you're good enough since we've been on the plains in Africa. We see it in ancient Greece. So hazing as a human process has been happening a long time. It actually came to the United States through Oxford to Harvard, like in the 1800s, and it has been continuing since. I personally have seen in the last 20 years a tremendous amount of sodomy and sexualized hazing on athletics in high school. And my point of view is that the kids take their blueprint of hazing, they stuff it in their backpack, and they take it with them to college. So they expect to be hazed, they expect to haze others, and sometimes it goes on to the military and the workplace as well.
So that's really interesting. And, the first letter in our organization is S for sports. So obviously want to focus on that. What is it about the culture of sports, and more so these days, knowing how early kids are starting sports, right? I mean, we've seen, athletes being recruited in literally elementary school, right? So the money is so huge. The Washington Commanders were sold yesterday for over $6 billion. Lots of money involved, lots of parental pressure, lots of pressure to succeed. What is it about that dynamic that lends itself to this culture of hazing that you've defined?
Well, I think to begin with, sports is huge in the United States. It's just part of our culture. And as you said, it's probably at the top. Like the most important thing is somebody to be athletic. That really has a definition. In this society, I think having a group and having an identity as part of a group is very important. And so athletics lends itself to that. Football in particular, but most of these team sports, that you get the feeling that they have your back, so you're going to be safe. And there's a hierarchy. There's always a hierarchy in teams because it's the new person versus the old person, the shorter person versus the taller person, the younger person versus the older person. And we see that, let's say, in high school, where we have freshmen versus seniors, and physically they're usually very different. So I think that sports attracts the concept of the hierarchy and also the coach. The coach has a lot of power. In youth sports, the coach may or may not be trained. Often they're not. Nobody's trained in management and adolescent psychology. They're given a lot of power. They give that power to the captain, who is not trained to manage a group, but is often given the power to run a practice or to tell the younger players what to do and how to do. And, we know that people abuse power. Kids abuse power, adults abuse power. And so an athletic team that has that hierarchy where power is being given covertly and overtly is a prime place for hazing to occur.
Doctor, why is there this code of silence? We know from the press conference from some of the alleged victims of the Northwestern scandal that's ongoing now, that a lot of them said that there's this culture of silence that has existed, that's gone on for generations, and they felt powerless to speak up. We know that victims of sexual assault in general have difficulty coming forward. We know the blame the victim culture that happens a lot in those situations. That's resulted in lots of states around the country doing away with statute of limitations for that very reason, because it takes a while for people to feel comfortable to come around and discuss this history. Why is that particularly the case in sports, when knowing that it's such a culture of machoism and using your body to move forward? Why is that culture of silence so prevalent here?
Well, there's a very famous saying, what goes on the locker room stays in the locker room. And I think that families practice that. What goes on in the family stays in the family. And there's a sense, even from youth sports, from, very young, that you don't tell on anybody, that's called snitching. People like me, hazing experts, were trying to change that and say, no, it's breaking the code of silence. It's protecting the next generation. It's being open and honest. And it's, not being abused, but trying to have people have a team and feel bonded without being embarrassed, without suffering painfully psychologically or physically. But that message hasn't really trickled down. And for the most part, 85% of any group, any community, whether it's a fraternity or a team, they believe you should maintain the status quo. You should stay behind the coach. You should do whatever you're supposed to do. You should pass on the tradition. And most people say, I did it, you did it. It's just part of it. Keep on going. And if you can't, you're a wuss. And that's where the concept comes that if you break the code of silence, you will be excommunicated. You will be isolated. There will be physical retribution. You will be intimidated. And most kids in high school and college have to leave the campus. Sometimes they have to leave the community. This is true. It is almost impossible to be a victim and stand up and break the code of silence and live your life as you did before you broke the code of silence.
And Doctor, I also imagine that a lot of victims are reluctant to come forward because of fear of losing their scholarship, right? I mean, a lot of the victims, certainly I think 5 of the 6 that came forward this week that have been identified, are student athletes of color, right? And many of them, I'm sure, although one of them was a multi-generational student, but I'm sure many of them, it was the first chance to go to college in their family's history. I'd imagine coming forward against a very powerful coach like Pat Fitzgerald, who's coming off a huge contract, they would be fearful that if they came forward with these allegations against a very powerful coach, they would be scared of losing the very reason they're in college.
Yes, I think they're scared of losing their scholarship, but they might be scared to stay on campus because they will be intimidated, not just by the football players, but by the entire athletic department, because there's a sense like, we will come together. When somebody blows the whistle in a fraternity or sorority, the entire Greek situation, the whole Greek will come after you and intimidate you. So yes, they will lose their scholarship. Yes, they might have to lose their entire education. Yes, they lose all their friends. And yes, it's quite scary. On the other hand, some of them have post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of them can be suicidal. Some of them have experienced these sexual things, and it goes straight to their core of who they are and what their masculinity is and their sexuality. So, there are a lot of things to consider, and it's very difficult for a victim to come forward.
Doctor, let's turn to Northwestern, right? Ben Crump, who's a very prominent plaintiff's lawyer, held a press conference a couple of days ago with some of the alleged victims, and there's more to come. And, a couple of things that struck me about Mr. Crump's comments were that he saw this as a civil rights issue because, like I mentioned, a lot of the alleged victims were, in fact, student athletes of color. Let's stop there for a second and discuss that. What are your thoughts on, the racial component of this? Is it easier to victimize or are student athletes of color, I should say, more likely victims of this kind of hazing because, as Ben Crump said, there's this culture of being afraid to come forward, and that's more burdensome on people of color, just given the racial dynamics of this country.
Well, truthfully, I've been in hazing cases with people of all colors, Caucasian, Latino, Black, Asian. And so I think that from my point of view, hazing permeates all racial ethnicities, all socioeconomic classes, all educational. It's just everywhere. And from my point of view, it's getting worse. Do I think that Black and Latino athletes might get it worse? Perhaps they do, and certainly some of the examples that we were giving at Northwestern would say that. I think that goes more to the coaches, and if you look at it, are coaches mostly white? Are they mostly Caucasian? Are they coming through are they aware of their biases? Do they care about their biases? Do they care that they have grown up in a culture of hazing and they believe that it's a good way of, creating bonding in teams? Do they really want to listen to people like me or change their perceptions? Probably not. And that may be only about hazing, but it may be about race and it may be about a lot of other things.
Doctor, given your vast experience in this area, and particularly as hazing relates to on-campus, how deep does this go at Northwestern, right? I mean, I can't believe the Buck's going to stop with the two coaches, Pat Fitzgerald and the baseball coach. The baseball coach was fired allegedly for more of a bullying, Pat Fitzgerald for hazing on the football side. But does this go as far as the university president, the athletic director, both of whom are relatively new, but it's got to go far deeper, as the plaintiffs alleged, correct?
From my perception, it's not just the coach, it's the entire team, it's the coaching staff, it's the assistant coaches, it's the athletic trainer. Everybody knows. Sometimes the cleaning staff knows. Everybody knows. A lot of people on a campus know when hazing is occurring. None of them break the code of silence. Why don't they break the code of silence? Not so easy to do. Are there a million anonymous ways for people to report and not have retribution? Probably not. And trying to figure out who knows and what they knew when is incredibly difficult. As I think you know, in hazing cases, a lot of times the teams are taught by a lawyer to answer the same thing over and over. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know. I don't remember. And so we really don't get to the bottom of it. What is so special about this case, from my point of view, is that there is a likeness to the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, where the group of victims are getting together as a group. So they're less likely to be individually hazed and have retribution to them because it's a group. So they have a process, a group process, and they're standing up as a group and saying, no, we don't want to take this anymore. We don't want our little brothers to be hazed. We want hazing to stop in athletics. Now, if this started a large movement across the country, if in high school and college, all the athletes said, you know what, that's right, we've had enough of this. We do not need to be hazed in order to feel bonded. And all you coaches need to pay attention. And all those coaches start to pay attention, and all those universities and all that money that goes into sports, including the pro players, if everybody joined together, maybe we could change the culture. Otherwise, I don't know that the culture is changing anytime soon.
Doctor, explain the sexual component of this, because you mentioned, there's been allegations in the Northwestern case of sodomy and some other sexual activities. But I imagine, like most sexual assault cases, it's not really about a sexual component. It's more about asserting your power over the victims. Is that true?
Well, I think all of hazing is about power. It's about maintaining the power hierarchy. It's maintaining who's on top versus who's on the bottom, and making sure that the people on the bottom know that they're like dirt and they have no power whatsoever. So I think that the sexual element is used because it is the quickest way to humiliate somebody. You will be in a position. Think about it. Think about anybody in any position. If you're absolutely nude and walking outside, are you not embarrassed? So here are players who are nude all the time, who have to touch other people's bodies, who are being touched, who are being hurt, who are being harassed, who are being violated in all different kinds of ways. And they cannot fight back because they're an individual against the team. And there's a culture and a tradition there, and there's nowhere to go and nowhere to hide. So I have found that sodomy is alive and well throughout athletic teams in high school. And all those parents and coaches need to be considering that that's what's happening in their locker rooms. Locker rooms and buses and hotels are under supervised, and the kids are smarter than we are. They know exactly where adults are and when they are. Are we looking at the video cameras that should be around? Probably not. And I think the sexuality goes from high school into college. We had Dr. Broom was a case at McGill all the way back in, I think, 1997 on a football team. They lost their season. It's alive and well. It's integrated in our culture. And I think it's getting normalized.
Doctor, as we end up our discussion here, lots of our listeners and viewers are people who are tasked with the responsibility at the highest level in universities and colleges of dealing with these issues and hopefully preventing them in the future. What advice do you have for people like them?
Well, I think the first thing is that whatever we've been doing has not been sufficient because I see hazing increasing in severity, with sexuality and in frequency. So, whatever you've been doing, checking off a box, having a speaker like me, writing, signing something, not working. Why is it not working? Because we don't have any center. We do not have any center of research throughout the country where we can report hazing, where we can train people to investigate appropriately, and where we can figure out ways through research, through psychological research and sports research on how to intervene and change this kind of culture. I think more importantly is the focus has been on how do we teach the kids the word of hazing and how to report, but we haven't been training the coaches in any meaningful way where they really look deeply inside of themselves. There is no such thing as what I do with doctors, a physician awareness training. Well, there is no coaches awareness training, which would be a one-on-one kind of training, sort of a therapeutic, educational kind of program that would really change the way the coaches think and the way they manage their teams, and not just the coaches, their entire staff. So it starts at the top, and it's like a pyramid, and it goes all the way down. I think we're starting at the bottom, and it's not good enough.
What about coaches? What could coaches do? I'm a coach. I've been a coach for many years for my son's teams. I know lots of coaches are listening and viewing this. What should coaches do, right? I mean, it seems like an easy fix that once you know about even an inkling of this, you immediately put a stop to it. But why is it so hard for coaches to do that? And what should they do when they are aware of even the possibility of this happening?
Well, I have met a few athletes who've been on teams where coaches have stopped hazing and where coaches have not stopped hazing. And what they say is when the coach makes it absolutely clear in the beginning that they won't tolerate anything that even smells a little bit like that, there is no hazing. However, I don't know how much training coaches have in youth sports, in high school, in going up. Are they really trained in management techniques? Are they really trained in what's the correct psychology for an adolescent mind? Are they even present in the locker room? We kicked out coaches in the 90s when the priests were being accused of doing all kinds of sexual things with men, and all of a sudden locker rooms are empty. Nobody's watching. So who's taking care of the kids? We're leaving bunches of adolescent kids who are all worked up and aggressive by themselves, and we're expecting them to police themselves and not to get into trouble doing things that are part of a tradition that they have already experienced as a victim. Now they're the perpetrators, they're senior members, and they think they have the right and duty to pass on that culture. And I don't know that many coaches are actually intervening with that in any meaningful way.
Well, I will just use that as a quick plug for one of our partners here at SERMA, the National Association of Youth Sports, nays.org. They are the preeminent organization that certifies and trains coaches across the country. So nays.org, great organization, very important work that they're doing. And I want to thank, most importantly, Dr. Susan Lipkins for this excellent discussion. The website is insidehazing.com. For my authority on this issue, Dr. Lipkins, as I mentioned, has been all over the media lately on this issue. And during the course of her 30-year career, you've seen her on CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, New York Post, Wall Street Journal. She is a member of the American Psychological Association. Dr. Lipkins, thank you so much for your valuable insight on this issue. Please come back and update us as the matter continues.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ideas, strategies, and opinions represented on this podcast are those of the speakers and do not represent the ideas, strategies, and opinions of their employers.